Hello and welcome to Poems On. This is the 5th program in the series, and today we're changing our theme after 4 shows on the theme of music to that of parents and children. I'm Al Basile, and my guests today are Catherine Tufariello and Tim Steele. Welcome. It's wonderful to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Al. Great to be here.
Yeah. Catherine, if you would start things off, please. We'll listen to you first.
Thank you, Al, for inviting me to participate in this unique series. It's great, and also for inviting me to participate with Tim, whose poems I've admired and enjoyed for so many years. It's a real treat. I'm going to start with a poem that is about watching my daughter, who then was 4 years old, kind of get it as far as what you have to do to work a jigsaw puzzle. And since writing the poem, I've learned that it is actually the case that right around 4 years old, children typically will stop doing jigsaw puzzles by just sort of random guessing, and will suddenly start to actually look at the picture and use evidence of the pieces and what's the picture that's on them to do them, which I thought was kind of cool. So I guess she was developmentally right on target there. It's called Jigsaw. 6 months ago, it made her cry. Furious, looking just at shape, she tried to force a swatch of sky into the chestnut stallion's nape. But now she sees the picture too. She chooses, studies, turns a piece, cajoling out of broken blue, high mare's tail clouds and wheeling geese. And from this mottled brown infers the muzzle of the piebald foal. Intractable particulars allude to their imagined whole, a world to which she palms the key. Her guesses are no longer blind but purposeful. Her strategy, patience and insight intertwined. The red-roofed farmhouse and the rows of corn are conjured, hills condense, and inch by inch, the meadow sows itself beneath the weathered fence. The final piece is placed and locks. Between the black mare's hooves, a plume of purple flowers, asters, phlox, and sprays of scarlet paintbrush bloom.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. Yeah. It's a
May I
wonderful,
ask a question? Go ahead, Tim. I'll ask a
I was
question.
going to say it's a wonderful way to begin too, because so often poems try to understand experience and piece together experience. And we think of our work as doing that, but of course, as Catherine's poem beautifully demonstrates, it's something that's occurs very early. It's just a human impulse that almost as soon as we're self-conscious, we engage in. Yeah.
So I have a comment and a question. The question first: were you physically present to see your daughter go through this transformation?
I noticed she liked puzzles, but she liked that she was fascinated by them, that is, but they were causing her a lot of torment. And I don't know that I was there for the breakthrough moment. I may not have been, but I remember suddenly noticing, and it was this particular puzzle. It was 4 horses in a field with the farmhouse. I was describing details from it. With this one, I suddenly noticed her sort of pondering and, not just sort of pounding her fist at the puzzle, trying to make them fit, but it was, I could see that there was intentional activity behind it. And it interested me. And then she got fascinated in a way that was different, where I want another puzzle now. And, we started.
Wow. Well, just the way that your face expresses the moment, it must have been a wonderful moment for a mother to see.
Yeah, as Tim so kindly said about the poem, that pattern making impulse, I think, is something that's so powerful. And yes, yeah. It was a real pleasure to watch her get that. Because often I think as parents, we're not there. It's partly happenstance when children have various moments of breakthrough or excitement. And
Well, that's why I asked, because you capture it so vividly. You make me believe that you were there when it happened, but that might just be a triumph of the imagination.
It might be.
Okay, well, just the one thing that I wanted to say about it is that the whole practice of puzzle solving is an interesting one for both songwriters and for poets who work in form, because it's a kind of a high level kind of puzzle solving when you're working. Stephen Sondheim, for example, has said that he views writing song lyrics in his shows as puzzles, and that what he's doing is puzzle breaking, puzzle solving. So, and I feel the same way sometimes if I'm working in a form that really is making some demands. I kind of believe the answer is there somewhere, that someone created the picture with the horses, and that even though I don't see it yet, I have to believe that I'm going to find the pieces that will make it clear to me. So, great way to start. Thank you. Tim, please.
Yes. Thank you, Al, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to read with Catherine and you. And I was very interested when you suggested the theme of parents and children, because my mother died in March. And I was at the time looking over things that I'd written that concerned her. She and my dad divorced when my brother and sister and I were still quite young. So she raised us as a single parent. Her background, like Catherine's, was in nursing. And talking about putting things together, as in Catherine's lovely jigsaw puzzle, we had a period of our lives when we were a very tight, close family. And then when we started to graduate from high school, Mom remarried, and with her second husband went to South America and had a different life. And there were two parts of her life that we still were very close and loving. But I remember in my mid-20s, when I was starting to write poetry, wanting to somehow reconcile or make sense of them. So I wrote a poem to Mom at that time, and this is it. It's set in Vermont. Her second husband had a farm there, and they eventually retired there. And there is a word I should probably gloss, a brake. That refers not to a device to arrest the motion of the vehicle, but New Englanders or Vermonters will know it's a bit of moist, marshy meadowland where there's lots of uncultivated, often happily so, vegetation. I also refer very briefly toward the end of the poem toward Colombian prints. She and her second husband, when they lived in Colombia, fell in love with and collected in a small way some of the art of the country. For my mother, it was late August. Standing by the well, I watched you gather wildflowers in the brake. Red clover, goldenrod, and chamomile, the dragonflies and sunlight in the air, and you waist deep in all that color there. So young you seemed then. There was hay to make and a cloud shadow on the Stevens Hill. We two had grown apart, but I could see that moment what you were once and are still. Only the light could touch you. The divorce, your father's death, the hard years, these of course were there too. But your curiosity and quiet were as wild as weeds, set off from all the past. Mother, I know your ways. Colombian prints, the mild defensive cough you fill a silence with, that picnic ease, talk and a paper plate poised on your knees. Yet I was startled, innocent of days, how much of pain and learning we survive. And I, discovering what I'd known before, stood silent in your calm, the light alive and perfect as you finished your bouquet, the wind in the long grass rippling away. Nor did I call you, nor could I ask more.
Thank you. What is, I wonder often myself, what is it about each of us that persists through all the changes that we experience over the course of a lifetime? And those who love us are open to these qualities, the things that you describe in this poem that transcended, that identified her and transcended all of the difficulties that we push our way through. It's to be able to capture the essence of another person it's an important, and if it's accomplished, a beautiful accomplishment. But to do it for your own mother is really, I wonder if I could have seen the things that you saw in parallel with, with my own parents. I know who I think they were, but that's really a vision, and it's a penetrating one. So thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm struck by how sort of painterly it is in that first stanza, especially, that I really feel as if I'm looking at a painting of her. The details are so precise. You waist deep in all that color there. There's so much loving attention in this poem. It's just really incredibly touching.
Thank
Yeah,
you. Thank you.
It's visual, but it's also musical. The way that you read it, it's a kind of a delicious sound in the mouth and made with the lips and tongue. So it simultaneously really sets off your visual sense and also your ears. So this is what we hope poetry will do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. This is a poem about something that I used to do when I was very, very young, but the memory of it is still vivid enough that I can write about it and try to recreate it for the listener. And it's called How I Learned About Parenting. At 4, I got away with stealing cream, or so I thought. That had to be the year. When I was 5, we left the tenement and moved out to the park all by ourselves. That house had a milk box with a cover. But when my family lived in the apartment, the creaking of the milkman on the stairs up to the 2nd floor would wake me up. And I would tiptoe by the bedroom door and make sure that my parents were asleep. New light was coming through the kitchen window, so I could see the cut glass of the doorknob and use both hands to turn it noiselessly. There on the floor, outside the open door, I'd kneel before the slim and graceful bottle. The milk back then was whole and separated and cold from standing in the empty hallway. It was protected by a paper lid inside a glass mouth, like a Dixie cup, and covered by a waxy paper cap, held on by folded flaps around the rim. I'd use my fingernail to pick one free and ease it open, just enough to loosen and remove the cover. Then the tab had to be pried and pulled to lift the lid. I knew the tasty cream was on the top, its color pure, like in the catechism where white milk in the bottle represented the spotless soul when in a state of grace. And I would drink a little, not too much. Then I'd replace the lid, and putting on the cap, I'd press the loose flap back again. And no one ever mentioned it, as though no one could tell the quart was less than full, as though no one could know that it was me.
This poem brought back such clear memories of the milkman making deliveries when I was a child. And for us, it was an aluminum milk box with a hinge lid. And
Yes.
I remember the bottles being put in there, and I've never seen a description until I listened to yours, never heard a description like that. The way that you could, the way it was folded exactly, and you could pry up the folds. And in our case, I don't know what color your tops were, but ours were red. And I remember that red wax top and what it felt like to pull it off. And just, there was something magical about that. And you really get that across when you talk about the slim and graceful bottle and how you kneel before it. And one really does feel this kind of sacred energy coming out of it. This energy of nostalgia also, because it's something that is lost, but not really, because you're conjuring it up again for us.
Yeah, yeah, and the very clear demarcation between the milk and the cream.
Yes.
Yeah, the other thing I really enjoyed about this, among many other things, but are also the glass doorknobs that have sort of, at least in my experience, gone into the depths of history. But, turning that with both hands, trying not to make a sound. I can remember doing things like that, not on an occasion quite like this, but the same thing, yeah.
So am I to take from both of your comments that neither of you were thieves at heart?
No,
never did quite what you did, but I do remember taking a spoon and lifting off some of the cream and eating it, not mixing it in.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you got somebody's permission first.
I can't guarantee that.
Well, I feel good about that. The only thing that I would say as I go back over this poem now, I mean, it's about the distant past, but it's not very old in terms of when I wrote it, is that there is an anachronism built into it when I mention about the milk bottles in the Baltimore Catechism and I guess you have to be a Catholic of a certain age to have been trained on the Baltimore Catechism. But what they had were a lot of drawings that went along with the text, which was a lot of questions and answers. And the drawings, there were 3 milk bottles next to each other. And I'm not getting an immediate response from you two, so I guess you're too young. But one milk bottle was pure white, and that represented the soul in a state of grace, like after you'd been baptized or after you just received the sacrament. The middle milk bottle was white, but with black spots in it.
Oh dear.
And that represented the soul when you had committed venial sins, not enough to sentence you to hell, but enough to send you to purgatory. And the third bottle was black. And that was the soul in mortal sin. And of course, the outcome of that. So the reason I bring this up is that you don't read that in the catechism until you're whatever, 9, 10, 11 years old, or later when you're getting ready for your, you maybe read it for your first communion, but anyway, I didn't know that image when I was stealing the cream. I learned it later. Okay. But because I was writing later, I took the liberty. So,
yeah. Ignorant Unitarian that I am, I would have probably looked at the black bottle and said, coffee.
Well, here in Rhode Island, people would say it was coffee milk, but
yeah.
That's a local favorite.
Yes, I was a Vatican II kid, so I don't remember that, but it's a great story.
Yeah.
Oh, Catherine,
I've heard of the Baltimore Catechism and seen pages from it, but I never actually.
You're far too young, and to be honest, you're better off for it. So, okay. we've completed one trip around the bases, so we're back to Catherine for her next offering.
All right. Let me find the right one here. I apologize. I had mine. Oh, here it is. Okay. So one of the sort of insights about parenting, I think, that comes through your poem, Elle, is that sometimes good parenting involves saying nothing, and sometimes it's best to just step back and not interact. And so I'll read a poem that kind of picks up on that a little bit. So some years ago, when I was living in Indiana, a cricket took up residence in the sump of our basement and serenaded us for several days. And the sound was just incredibly loud. I was just amazed at how a tiny creature could make that much noise. And because the sump was in our laundry room, and there was a laundry chute that went up to the second floor, you could really hear it throughout the house. So this poem started out, I wrote the first half of it about the cricket and couldn't figure out where to go from there for a while, but then ended up finding a way through. And the second half of the poem is the one that's more related to your poem now. The cricket in the sump. He falls abruptly silent when we fling a basket down or bang the dryer shut, but soon takes up again where he left off. Swept by a rainstorm through a narrow trough clouded with cobwebs, into Lord knows what impenetrable murk, he's undeterred. You'd think his dauntless solo was a chorus, this rusty sump, a field or forest spring. And there is something wondrous and absurd about the way he does as he is bidden by instinct, with his gift for staying hidden, while making sure unseen is plainly heard. All afternoon, his tremolo ascends clear to the second story, where a girl, who also has learned blithely to ignore us, sings to herself behind her bedroom door. Maybe she moves to her invented score with a conductor's flourish, or pretends she's a Spanish dancer, lost in stamp and whirl and waving fan, notes floating as she plays, through the open window where the willow sways and shimmers, humming to another string. There is no story where the story ends. What does a singer live for but to sing?
Yeah.
My husband and I would be very, very careful not to let our daughter know that we were listening to her. So that's where discretion is a better part of valor. We stood there. I remember we stood there listening and we're just grinning and delighted, but we knew better than to say anything or knock on the door or anything of that sort.
Very nice. Very wise. Was she good?
She has been involved in theater and musical theater since. And yes, she's not just completed her sophomore year of college, and she's theater arts and biology are her two majors. So she always loved to sing, even, before and after that.
Oh.
I'm her mom, so you shouldn't ask me about, to gauge her talent, but.
You're the only one I know who knows her.
Yeah, that poem nicely illustrates Robert Frost's idea that sometimes our best poems or the best poems come when we sense something is leading to something, but we don't know what, and the ice cube just floats on its melting and eventually finds its connection, its subject, and just flows through to it. Yeah. When
I was at Brown, I was mostly a fiction writer. And what I was trained to do in writing novel manuscripts, big manuscripts, was to never know where it was going, was to know the characters and to write a draft without any pre-knowledge of where it was going, to let the characters go where they wanted to go. And once I got to the end of a draft, to then take that and use it as a kind of a map that would let me figure out where the story was underneath all of that action. And it stood me in good stead, because I I'd say 90% of the time when I start anything, whether it's a song or a poem, I don't know where it's going. I also don't know what the form's going to be. So, I mean, I've never sat down and said, I'm going to write a sonnet or something. So trusting the process is a wonderful feeling, especially if again and again you're taken someplace that you're happy with. That's
Indeed.
good.
Indeed.
Tim?
Oh, okay, this next poem I'll read. Actually, I chose it partly because I know, Al, you'll be reading a poem about your mom's eggplant recipe, and Catherine
Yes.
has a lovely poem that goes backwards in reverse through her mom's life and into her mother, separate from her children and her marriage ultimately, and the complications of age that happen to us when we proceed linear from the cradle to the grave. One of the blessings of my mom's second marriage was that she didn't have to look after us. She was a great cook and she had a real social genius, but when she was raising us, we kids were always coming and going, and so were our friends, and there was school and music lessons and basketball practice. But when she and Erlen got together, they could entertain and could have nice dinners by themselves. And this is just a short description of a summer dinner they had on their farm. And I imagine the two of them, it's evidently late summer because the central feature of the dinner is corn on the cob. And the poem is called Shucking Corn. He plays the host, concerned with timing. The guests, though, are the awkward sort. Moths crashing on the screens and climbing about in photophilic sport. He sets the kettle on and tests a casserole now nearly cooked. She, on the porch's couch swing, rests and sees an ear they've overlooked. And then the white silk gently torn, she feeds a paper bag the husk. He calls her. She holds up the corn as if a torch to light the dusk.
When I read that, the first thing I was struck by as I was partway in was that I had never encountered the word photophilic before, but the context of the poem made it perfectly clear what the meaning of that word is. And I thought, this is very nice that often I will read poems that contain words that send me to the dictionary, but this one didn't even require me to leave my seat.
Yeah.
It contained the seeds of its, of its own fruition. So I was happy with that.
Yeah, yeah, well, I think you're a good etymologist, that's all. Yeah, no, yeah.
That's a very arresting image, the final one. It suggests a lot of weight to me. I mean, I know it's a domestic scene and there's not a great symbolic context, but the gesture just seems like a natural, meaningful gesture, which is a great thing to have right at the end of a poem. It's kind of the last thing you see on the screen before the credits roll.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry, Kevin.
Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to say, though, I love the Frostian as if, which keeps it from being, at all portentous. It's just, it's a beautiful one. The corn, and it reminds us the ear of corn really does look like a torch in the dusk. You can imagine it, you can see it clearly, and the gentle humor in the poem too. I think it balances out that image really perfectly.
Thank you, Catherine.
Wow. Well, so this actually, I didn't anticipate it, but this is a very nice segue for me into the next one that I'm going to read. First of all, because I'm coming out of a poem which shows a domestic scene with a married couple. And so I'm going to read this poem, which also shows a rather different tone to a domestic scene between a married couple. But if I could suggest the tones of voice that my mother and father use, and I will try, but if I could really capture them, you would see how funny this entire exchange really was. It's called Black Pearls, 1942. And I'll just preface it by saying that my dad was in the Army and he was assigned to the Pacific Theater, and he was at Fiji and New Caledonia as staging areas before he was sent to Guadalcanal. And so he was on a lot of long sea voyages, getting from one of these places to another. And that's the backdrop for this exchange. Black Pearls, 1942. Tell them about the black pearls. What? The pearls that you won in the service on the boat. I won them in a crap game 2 days out of Fiji. There was nothing else to do on board ship, that's all. I couldn't miss that night. How many were there? I don't know, a handful. Of black pearls? Do you know how much they'd be worth now? How did you lose them? I didn't say I lost them. So you gave them to those island girls, didn't you? My father looked annoyed, but didn't fight it. I'd seen the yellowed snapshots, half-clad girls on either arm, no less, him grinning in a sawtooth skirt like native men on Fiji. You should have brought them back for me, my mother said. My father got a little nettled. We didn't know where they were sending us, he said. We could have been dead the next day. But you weren't, my mother went on. So you could have brought them back. A handful of black pearls. Her eyes were glittering. You should have given them to me. And how was I supposed to do that when I hadn't even met you yet? My dad said, half triumphant. With arched eyebrow and quick move of a hand, she dismissed him. Never mind about that. You should have given them to me.
I found myself wondering as you read this, how often you listen to this little dialogue. Growing up, although she says, tell him the story, I had the sense maybe you'd already heard the story and this is coming around again.
Well, I heard the story more than once, but I heard a lot of stories because my father was a fantastic storyteller. And so my mother frequently prompted him to tell stories. And I really inherited that propensity from him. But this was, I maybe dramatized this and made my mother sound more serious than she was. But she definitely was chagrined that at one point he had in his possession a handful of black pearls. And by the time he met her, they were gone. He'd frittered them away.
And she suspected how that had happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he doesn't defend himself.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
he couldn't really. But the other thing that actually furnishes a little bit of a backdrop for this is that my dad was 8 years older than my mother. So he had an entire young adult life in the 30s before the Army. And he went into the Army when he was already 28 years old. So there were all kinds of stories of his girlfriends during the Depression. And she loved to get him to tell those stories because of course, she had slain every one of those dragons.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
It's
anyway,
impressive. It's impressive to be able to write a whole a poem that's almost entirely dialogue in blank verse. That was a pleasure to see.
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
thank you. But as it is, I've actually written probably a half a dozen plays, 3 of them full length, that are all dialogue and blank verse. So if I couldn't do it by now, shame on me.
So I'm trying to think how to make a segue into the next poem from there. Okay, so there's a connection of islands in the ocean, and if you think of oyster shells and pearls, I'm now going to read about a different shell, and this is just this is if you imagine those black pearls that actually come down to you, and that you were writing about them. This is a gift that was given to my family when I was a child that just fascinated me, and seemed like this emblem of another part of the world that I'd never seen. And it is called Conch. Sorry, I keep having trouble finding the exact poem I want. So the title is Conch, and it goes, on the middle shelf of the glass and chrome credenza in the dining room, there was a heavy shell brought back by a family friend from the Bahamas, flanked by an ashtray and the dinner bell. From the outside, it was homely and forbidding, its spiny turrets always facing up. But underneath, it couldn't be more different, fine-grained and shiny, like a china cup. A marble staircase spiraled through the center, descending to a chamber lined with pearl. But because the stairwell quickly got too narrow, even for the fingers of a little girl, whatever lay inside stayed safely hidden, tucked in the darkness at the heart of it. She shut her eyes and listened at the entrance, till she was almost small enough to fit.
Did you read a lot of wonder tales when you were young, like the Arabian Nights or something like that?
I think what's behind this is probably Alice in Wonderland, because I love the idea of
Okay.
shrinking down. Yeah.
Yes, okay.
I read
That's
that
what it
book
made
over and
me-
over again as a kid. Yeah, and I think
That's what it
that
made
kind
me
of,
think of.
yeah, that kind of fascination is probably, yeah, what was when I was imagining, being small enough to actually go inside and see what was in there. I recently came across your poem Geode, Al, and I had the sense it came out of the same sort of fascination with what's hidden and mysterious. Because you talk about you don't want to actually smash the geode open and see what's inside, but that amethyst is in there and it's in there, but it's not available to be seen. And I think something of the feeling is behind this one too.
Yeah, well, thank you for mentioning that. That one, I'd rather have 1,000 different images that it could be than break it open and be reduced to one.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I didn't know that it was you. I thought it might have been your daughter, but it's a wonderful image. It's a sweet image, imagining yourself getting small enough to go in and find out the secret.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lovely place to end it.
Yeah.
But just in general, you don't have to work too hard to make a segue from one poem to the next. It's not as if we knew.
That's true.
We didn't really know we were going to do this when we wrote the poem. So,
but it's fun, and in this case, it is appropriate. I have a segue, and this poem I'm about to read does not have the wonderful, eerie, psychological sense of shrinking or condensation that Catherine's does, but it was an attempt to sort of write, the vanity of poets is limitless, of course, an attempt to write in 4 stanzas, a kind of Thomas Mann novel about the Old Testament character David.
why not?
Yeah, but it ties into the parent-child thing, of course, because he is memorable as a boy and a ward of the old King Saul. Then as the young man, the lover, the husband, the betrayer of his friend Uriah, and then, of course, as a parent who loves his child Absalom, his son, but whose son rebels against him and nearly overthrows him. The poem is told in the voice of David himself, and I said it sort of, I fear pretentiously, with a subtitle, David at Mahanaim during the rebellion, when Absalom has the upper hand and it looks like he's going to overthrow him. But it plays with the idea of the ways that youth and age are connected, and trying to make sense, I guess, going back also to Catherine's Jigsaw puzzle of trying to see some kind of integrated pattern in a life and come to some assessment of it. In the king's rooms, David at Mahanaim during the rebellion. This evening I paced chambers where I sought to charm an old king with a shepherd's song. Now I am king and aging. I once thought I could forever dwell in quiet, caught from melodies I crafted. I was wrong. Young, loved by all, I lived beyond all doubt. I calmed the trembling flank and frightened eye of the young doe, and later led the rout of the invaders, lifting with a shout the giant's head up to an answering sky. Despised now even by my son, I raise no shout to heaven. An uncertain friend, a faithless leader, I can only gaze across a land which lent me once its praise, and which tonight I grudgingly defend. Let my smooth, artful counselors secure victories in the name of faith and truth. I can no longer care, nor am I sure whom I should pray forgiveness for, the old man misled or the too favored youth.
Mm-hmm. Were you at all thinking about Tennyson's Ulysses?
Gee, I hadn't thought of that, no, at the time, no.
Here's why, the reason I say it. Part of it is, actually what you're doing, you're going in a very different direction, but the relationship to the son, it's interesting that the son comes up, of course, in Tennyson's poem, he's giving way to his son because his son is a more able administrator than he would ever be. And so he acknowledges some of his own failings as a domestic monarch. He's not really suited for it. But the lines about his advisors who are sleek and smooth and able to do things, for me, they also strike that note that Tennyson has Ulysses talk about later in the poem, where he's talking about Telemachus and how, you know, he can quell the quarreling tribes but of course the character of David is a very different one, and I think this poem is more nuanced and complex because the relationships, it's about a conflicted character who at the same time acknowledges his own failings and has to live with them instead of ending on some kind of triumphant note, the way, in a way, Tennyson does. So it reminded me of it. I just wondered if it was somewhere in your awareness when you were working on it.
It certainly wasn't conscious. I love the Tennyson poem, though, so maybe it was bubbling somewhere in my unconscious or subconscious. As you say, it's the Aging Ulysses is a fascinating figure, and it's some of the same. There's some of the same kind of tension between the father and son, though generally their relationship is depicted as happy. As you know, in some versions of the story, Telemachus ends up mistakenly killing his father. Yeah,
but I mean, it's very rich. And again, I did a little research because I knew the general outline of David's history, but I didn't know that he had a string of wives, each from a different tribe, the better to create a lineage that would help unify his people. And of course, it's the children of those various marriages that set a lot of the difficulties in motion, because Absalom rebels partly because after he's been seeking vengeance for his sister who was raped by her half brother. So Absalom actually has a good beef.
Yeah.
But so it's a very complex life that David leads. And so the difference from his days as a hero to where he is at the end of this poem are just so stark and dramatic. It was great to see that squeezed into 4 stanzas. And it also made me think of Joseph and his brothers, although that's in 4 volumes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't mean to leave you out, Catherine. Did you have something you were going to say?
I thought it's really interesting to think about being David as a father who recognizes when he calls Absalom the 2 favored youth, he recognizes in some ways, he's responsible, or, he has spoiled his son and, encouraged maybe a temperament or habits of behavior that then would lead him later on to rebel against his father and lead his father to have to lead forces that would destroy him, his own son. One can really feel the tragedy involved in that.
Yeah, and that wonderful point, Catherine. Yeah, and I think this is not my poem, but the author of Samuel 1 and 2. But it is so heart-wrenching when David's forces kill Absalom. They kill him quickly when he's hung up in the tree by his hair, because they don't want his father to come and see him, because his father will pardon him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's one of the most vivid biblical images that I took from first reading the Bible, was Absalom caught in the crotch of the tree by his hair.
Which apparently was associated with his vanity, right? That he was snared by that.
Yeah.
And I read something, I read a little about this too, because it's just such a fascinating story. And there was something about a rabbinical text in which the Lord, I guess Absalom is condemned and is with, others who are being tormented for the evils they had done in life. But the voice of the Lord calls down and asks them not to spare Absalom the worst of it, because of his father loved him so much.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. That's fascinating. Thank you.
That's a natural extension of what you just said about how they killed him quickly
before
his father could use clemency. Wow. Well, that's a rich story. Thank you for bringing it to this group of poems, because it takes parenting and parents and children into a different direction. So, well, I'm up. And because I am not a parent and have never been one, this is not about any child of mine, nor is it about any child I have personally experienced, but it's about somebody, and I believe that they're like this. It's called Maya's First Hard-Boiled Egg. Set down by mother in a rush, the brown egg wobbled drunkenly around the dish, skidded as Maya brought her finger down to poke it. It would take a special wish to make it small enough to fit her face and not too hard for baby teeth to bite. Her older brother, watching from his place across the kitchen table to incite his sister's tears, piped up in impish glee, "Bet you can't make it stand up on end." She tried it as he grinned in mockery. Each end up, she couldn't comprehend why every time she took her hand away, the top would lose its balance and descend, and once again, she'd look on in dismay. Her brother saw no reason to extend her agitation. With a gallant reach across the table and a knowing smirk, he said, "Okay, now watch. I'm going to teach you how. Here's all it takes to make it work." With that, he raised the egg and brought it down and cracked the big end on the tabletop. It stood in fractured majesty. The frown on Maya's face transformed into a drop at first, and then a torrent of her tears. Fetched by her daughter's cries, Mother surveyed the damage on the table. There are fears, not only groundless, but a grace displayed upon a transformation of our sight. "It's busted," Maya sobs. "Oh, honey, no." Her mother says, "It's not. It's still all right. It's just this broken shell that's got to go." Her practiced hands remove the covering. The egg, unshelled, is placed back on the plate. It's white on white, an unmasked lover hovering above the surface of its unlike mate. Maya's expression quiets down to mild. She sees a vapor round the white orb, wreathing warm against the china dish. The child, eyes wide in wonder, coos out, "Look, it's breathing."
Here we have a first appearance in this reading of Sibling Torment.
Yeah, yeah,
I can see this little scene unfolding.
yeah, exactly.
This is the sort of thing I took a pass on, having only one child. But I'm reminded also of just, I'm reminded of toddlers and how, or young children, and how they really are at the mercy of their feelings, sort of tugged hither and yon, and how poignant that is, that a little Maya finally is calmed by her mother, and then she's rewarded with this kind of magical moment with the steam and the breathing.
I thought you were going to say that you were grateful that you had sisters and no brothers.
Oh, sisters. I'm the eldest, so I was probably more likely to take the brother's role in this little scene. The sisters can definitely get at one another too.
Yeah.
Make no mistake.
Yeah.
I'm having a hard time imagining you doing this particular thing, though. Seems kind of nasty.
I'm going to keep my counsel on that one.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Well, you get the next word.
Okay. Well, here's a poem in which my sisters figure, as do both of my parents. And this is an ekphrastic poem that was inspired by my favorite of all our family photographs. And I think Ella is going to be putting it up in a moment. There it is. This was taken by my father. And I think the entire family has agreed that we have a special affection for this particular picture. The poem is called Christening Day, 1968. On the left side, the eldest girl, 5, mugging with motherly pride, is holding her 1-year-old sister hooked by the waist. She, in turn, the soon-to-be feminist, beaming, is clutching a carpenter's level. The girl on the right, a bit older, squirms with a grin in her chair, more imp than mommy in training. Suspended behind her page boy and over the opposite shoulder is a doll she seized by the hair. The tableau's central figure has gotten all 4 of her daughters decked out in harmonizing spring dresses, a kind of suburban fugue of cloud white and summer sky blue. Even the carpenter's level is blue, though the doll missed the memo. Her getup is buttercup yellow. Mom, freshly permed, wears a rose pink blouse with a Peter Pan collar, jaunty brown cat's eye glasses, and a lipsticked, jubilant smile. On her lap sits the newest edition, just cleansed of original sin that morning and snatched from perdition. Swathed in her frothy white gown, still almost monastically bald, she gazes away from the camera, agog, with a look half perplexed and half alarmed or appalled, as if she is thinking, just what have I gotten myself tangled up in? Who am I? Where is this planet? And why do I itch all over? Looking on, you inhabit the same vantage point the photographer, Dad, had half a century back. What joke has he made to provoke such unruly joy from them all? Banish the urge to gaze down like an impotent God from above, wringing your hands in thrall to a future they're innocent of. They're happy, whatever comes after. To look is to join in the laughter erupting out of the frame.
It's wonderful we can see the picture.
Yeah.
Yes, I published it without the ability to show it with the picture. And when I told my father, I had sent him the poem. And when I told him I was publishing the poem, he said, with the picture? And I said, well, no. And he said, well, you know, it's really not the same without the picture, can't be. He'll be pleased that I'm getting to read it now with the picture.
Yeah. I love how gently you evoke or let come forth the, what for the lack of a better word, you know, one might call the metaphysical or religious dimension in the poem. It's, you handle it with a very light touch, but you know, this is just a moment of joy, as you say, bursting from the picture frame, but you know, there is so much yet to come, and the sense of innocence and the wonderful little just christened baby who sort of is the kind of intelligence of the poem. What's going to happen?
Yes.
It's all very gently done. It would be easy to, you know, overemphasize the, you know, the foreboding, and you don't do that at all, but it's there, and so gently and wonderfully. Yeah.
Wow. You know, the buttercup color on the doll, which the doll, like Absalom, is being held by her hair. It's actually a very nice compliment to the powder blues. You know, they're complementary colors. So this is all still nicely harmonized.
Well, my mother always tried really hard to get us dressed up in a coordinating way for such pictures, the Christmas pictures too, and to sort of have us look more or less respectable. But then my father had a habit of always getting us to crack up just as he was about to take the picture. And so they always end up looking kind of goofy like this. But of course, in retrospect, I'm very glad the personalities came through in the picture.
Oh yeah, no, it's a priceless photo. Shall we, we don't have any, I don't have siblings, so I don't have a photo like that. But what do you have for us next, Tim?
Well, actually, I have a poem with siblings in it. It's a poem that concerns the period when my brother and sister and I were growing up, and Mom worked as a nurse at the Mary Fletcher Hospital in Burlington, Vermont. I mention it because you mentioned in one of your early shows, I think with David Katz and Alicia Stallings, about meeting Howling Wolf up in Burlington once. Mm-hmm. But this poem compares two transitions. The first is the transition at dawn, when birds active at night cease calling, while birds active in the daytime rouse and start to sing. And the second transition, and Catherine will know about this from her work in nursing and palliative care and psychological counseling. It involves the transitions at the hospital, the shifts that nurses work to maintain around the clock care for their patients. And so Mom would sometimes work from 7 to 3, sometimes 3 to 11, sometimes 11 to 7. I should explain one detail in the poem because it's, you know, passed from current usage. In Mom's generation, every nurse's training college had their own specially designed cap, which graduates would wear to distinguish themselves from their colleagues from other institutions. And Mom graduated from Skidmore's program, and when she attended one of her reunions, the college gave her a replica of the school cap and gave it to the other members of the class who attended the reunion. And when I was writing this poem 5 or 6 years ago, I discussed it on the phone with Mom, and she sent me the cap, and sort of it's a kind of a family relic now. The poem is called Changing of the Guard. Prior to sunrise, as it's growing light, nocturnal birds relay the burden of their vocal arts to their diurnal counterparts. An owl hoots as a coda to the night. A finch chirps as a prelude to the day. It is as if the birds, wings notwithstanding, are passing a baton. They make me think as they converse of when my mother was a nurse. Each morning as the night shift was disbanding, the day shift at her hospital came on. Our breakfasts fit whichever shift she drew. By an unspoken rule, leaving for work or coming from it, she held a little family summit. We kids, the instant she excused us, flew out of the kitchen to prepare for school. I liked the way the shifts aligned, the flow and order they created. While the white dress all nurses wore expressed their brisk esprit de corps, their caps had different designs to show the colleges from which they graduated. Listening to the birds, I can't infer which schools they went to. Still, like sensitively trained musicians, they're good at managing transitions, just as my mother and her colleagues were in looking after the infirm and ill. So, though it is a signal to a mate most birds send through the air, or else a claim to territory, their chorus seems to tell a story of former mornings and to correlate the continuities of song and care.
You mentioned, Tim, the birds passing the baton, and then the shifts of nurses passing the baton from one to another.
Yeah.
And reading this and listening to you read it, it struck me that your mother is the kind of the conductor of the whole of the family. The way she really structured the transitions in the home, and although she was working and she was sending all of you off to school, and she was having a little family summit every day at breakfast, and she gave, the continuities of care were operating very much through her, and one can feel that, and in an understated way, but one can feel it. She was the center and the core of the family and held everything together.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
One of the reasons why I thought you two would be a good guest pairing is that you both have this ability to deal with complex and deep issues in a subtle and underplayed way rather than in a big and garish way. And so I thought that you'd have compatible tone in the way that you go about presenting yourselves. So thank you for showing that I wasn't out of my mind.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to share a photograph, since we've inaugurated this idea of having screen shared photographs when they're appropriate to the poems. And this is, you all seeing this black and white photograph as I speak?
Yes.
Okay, I won't preface it. I'll just read the poem. It's called Not Lost, Found. Discovered in a wooden case I saved out of my parents' house after they passed. This snapshot captures perfectly the scene. St. Anthony Procession, 1950. In the background, two white-shirted men shoulder the litter on stout poles. The saint stands on the platform they support with lilies around his feet to mark his purity. He holds a book. The Christ child has appeared out of his meditations, and it stands cradled in his arms upon the page. All up and down the vestments of the saint, paper money has been pinned. And in the foreground on the left, a deacon stands in waist-length stole with salver at the ready, who's grinning at the living child perched in his father's arms in foreground opposite, an envelope beneath his feet. He's been handed $1, coached to make the offering. I was this child, a greenback in my grip, already practicing my lifelong habit to examine closely everything the world puts in my hands before I let it go. I hold it, not done looking at the money. My father, tilting out of frame, has realized I'm not about to part with it. He turns face to the camera, laughing. I look down. The deacon, patient, grins. The marching band my mother's cousins play in, snares and cornets cracking in the summer air, vibratos thick as meat sauce, brays and wobbles down the street right by our house as the procession starts on its way again. This moment surely doesn't last. The $1 duly given up will find its way onto the vestments of the saint, the patron of all that is lost. I hold this photo in my hand today and question it. I feel some mysteries encoded in its composition. I, so like the child protected by the saint, the page from which he sprang, so like the money. Drawn from the envelope between my feet. But not until I read it differently does it give up its secret, which lies not in looking at the bill, but at my father. He has a look I've never seen before. My mother must have been behind the camera. The glee my father shares is meant for her as they begin to learn what they've brought into the world. Because I'm looking down, distracted, he can show it. An expression they both were careful not to let me see throughout their lives, though I could feel the pride in their reserve. They always moderated their response to a precocious child whose curious interests must have mystified and whose early achievements got him noticed. They didn't want me too full of myself. Because I wasn't looking then, I can see now what they kept between themselves. To find a puzzle piece of the lost world of childhood's rare. It's rarer still to find the piece you didn't know enough to miss. Standing above this case of memory, I examine closely what is in my hand, smile at my good fortune, then let go.
It's a wonderful, lively poem, Al. And I really like the, particularly your description of your father's expression and what you now understand it to have meant.
Yeah.
And when you first put the picture up, my gaze went to the child and holding the bill, but then almost immediately to the father's face, even though it's at the edge of the frame and is cut off, you know, you only see half of it. That was really what drew my attention. And it is that parental joy that you see. And that, as you point out, we don't always have really notice it as children or have a chance to see that particular look, that expression. But we feel it, as you put it. I feel the pride and the reserve. And you were told, don't be too full of yourself, apparently. In my family, it was, don't get a big head now.
Yeah, same
Knew
thing.
the pride underneath that was there.
Well, that was the thing. I knew they were proud of me, but they never said anything.
Mhm.
They shared it between themselves. They must have, but they kept me out of it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. I agree with everything Catherine says, and in the poem, so in the picture too, you start with the focus on the child, and it just nicely shifts to the parent, who seems literally and figuratively marginal at first, but that's the subject. Yeah.
It was wonderful discovering this. I only discovered this photo a couple of years ago. So, 70 years had passed. I'd never seen it. I didn't know it existed. But I really saw something in my dad's expression there that he may have felt that way inside when he was around me if I did something that they really approved of, but he kept it. He kept himself under a good level of reserve. So this was a nice message, not intended for me, but it reached me. So it's very good. All right, we're up to our last round. Excuse me. And what's my line? This is the lightning round, but we can take our time.
Okay. This next one is a poem for my mother. And it actually, the original, I guess, inspiration behind it. This was another case where, as with the cricket poem, I didn't quite know where to go with the opening. And it took me a while to figure it out. But I had been reading reports about a theory in physics that the Big Bang simultaneously brought two universes into existence. Our own, in which time proceeds in a forward direction and doesn't reverse. And then another one, a mirror universe, in which time goes, the arrow of time goes in the other direction. And that was just fascinating to me, just the idea of it. And so I took some notes on, I read a little about this and took some notes, and then jotted down the first line of the poem, thinking I feel like I'm fascinated with this mirror universe. But it just sat in my notebook for probably a couple of years. And it wasn't until later, and it was after my mother had passed, and she had been a physics teacher, that the idea of taking off from that point in a poem for her came to me. The title of it is Clear Water, and that's just a translation of the town she grew up in Wisconsin, Eau Claire. The only other thing I want to just mention is the poem alludes to the story of my parents meeting one another, which occurred at a 4th of July student picnic at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. My father didn't want to go to the picnic, and he had a bunch of buddies who were going, and they talked him into coming by saying, "Joe, you can play baseball, come on." And so he came because he wanted to play baseball. I think he really wanted to. He was a chemistry student. He probably wanted to get work done or something. He said, no, come along. And so it started pouring in the first or second inning of this game. And he had to take refuge in the shelter. Clearwater. In the mirror universe where time runs backward, the one that physics tells us may exist, you are becoming younger every minute. Watch spinning counterclockwise on your wrist. You throw the covers back like Lazarus. Rogue cells redifferentiate and shrink. The lurid crimson drug that burned your veins flows back into the bag. Your cheeks grow pink. Now you're Penelope, pulling yarn from needles. Now, a young mother with a game day smile, freeing 4 squirming girls from matching outfits, scattering toys, dirtying bathroom tile. Later, the slender bride in cat's eye glasses. Then the new physics teacher. Then the rain, the day of the picnic where you met our father, evaporates, becoming clouds again that roll away and leave you in the shelter with other friends, while he, forgetting love, unsees the girl he knew at once he'd marry and backs out, putting on his baseball glove. We're strangers to you now. Before much longer, you'll be a schoolgirl climbing from the bus, undoing homework at the kitchen table, all innocent of cancer and of us, filling the trees with fireflies with your cousins, swept backward on your bike with windblown hair, unpicking morning glories by the river that winds from Lake Wissota through Eau Claire.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
Even without knowing the details about your dad only going to the picnic because of wanting to play baseball and then having it be rained out, and you pruned away a lot of stuff that doesn't really need to be there, because this backward progress is it assumes a kind of a momentum of its own that, if you were to go too much off the track, would actually make it seem less. It's so natural the way you do it. It doesn't seem like the wrong way time flows. You know what I mean? In other words, if you had started incorporating more plot elements that make us think about consequence, that would run counter to what you're doing. So you just leave that stuff out. It's great. It's, how did you figure out what to say and what to leave out?
I think I did. I knew pretty early that I wanted the story of their meeting to be kind of in the center of it. I guess I had an intuition that was right. But other than that, I don't know if I can answer that. I guess initially I did picture my mother's cancer treatment being reversed, and what that would have been, and then tried to just, I don't know. That's a good question. Tried to pick out some just key points that got across things about her that we remember. Like she loved to knit. For many years, she was always knitting, and she actually taught my daughter how to knit. So now my daughter is a really good knitter. She was always trying to get me to take that up, and it never really quite worked. So she had to wait quite a few years to get a granddaughter. And she would hold my daughter in her lap and hold her hands. And Sophie still remembers this, that she would manipulate her hands. And that was, it gave her the feel of what it was like to knit, and to the point that she wanted to do it. She wanted to do it too. And my sisters and I had this running joke growing up that if it had been sunny on the 4th of July,
of course,
in 1959, we would never have been born. So it was just kind of a running joke, just, the happenstance involved in all of our lives and the randomness of it.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lovely poem, Catherine. Yeah.
Wow. I just think your instinct was, you had to do it by instinct. What details you chose to include had to be instinctive, because we don't have a body of experience that shows us how to choose a receding timeline rather than a progressing one. So did the poem go through drafts where you prune things out, or is this pretty much the way that you cast it from the beginning?
My poetic process is almost always, and I was really identifying with what you said earlier about the jigsaw puzzle. It's like this fiendishly difficult jigsaw puzzle. And often I just don't manage to pull everything together. Like I just, the majority of the time, it remains fragmented. But I feel like I get little bits and pieces usually, and I have to figure out where even they fit. And, if the poem is going to be a narrative, where they belong. So it's I wouldn't recommend my process to anyone. I think it's terrible. It takes forever. But for this poem was one of those rare just sort of gifts. And I think I wrote it in just a day. And which is for me is, you know, very, very, very fast. So it just sort of pulled together. And I think it was because there was the reading I'd done about the physics problem, and it had probably been percolating somewhere when I wasn't even aware of it for those couple of years. And then, yeah.
Well, it worked. It worked. Wow. Very, very nice. Last round, Tim, your turn.
Yes, I have a site-specific poem, so to speak. It's hardly a poem. It's really just a little epitaph.
I'm going to pull it up.
Okay.
I'm going to pull it up for you right now.
Yeah. This is a boulder on the farm my mother lived on for 4 decades. And when her husband died in 2003, some of his ashes were buried under the boulder, and some of hers are there. Some of hers rest there now. And when he died, my brother and sister and mom asked me if I'd just write a few lines for him. And then when mom died in March, my brother and sister asked me if I would add an epitaph for her, for a plaque that will be put on the boulder for her. I scarcely feel that this poem is a poem of mine. It really is just spoken in the voice of family history. And it just will read, Ruth Reed Guessing, October 3rd, 1924 to March 9, 2021. As winds sweep fields, life swept us through. Joy, puzzlement, relief, and shock. The changing seasons changed us too. What stayed us then? She was our rock.
Is there going to be, how are they going to move there isn't room on that ellipse. So is there going to be a separate?
Yeah, no, I think the plan is just to remove her husband's earlier piece, just to move it over to the right a little bit, according to the guy who engineered the first plaque. That's just what they'll do with the second, and hers will be a little lower and to the left. Yeah.
Well, it's a nice succinct way of encapsulating what endures and what changes. And that is what we think about when people pass, is that they brought us to this point in our lives and we're going on and they're not. So did you write the first 4 lines that's on the stone as well?
Yes, those were for her husband, our stepfather. Yeah. He was a conservationist. In addition to being a biochemist, he was an enzymologist. But he was, as she was, very interested in conservation. And he hated porcupines. If you can read that, it says.
I noticed it. Yeah. Go ahead, read it for us, please.
Yeah, he loved the earth, its fields, its trees, its creatures, porcupines aside, and spent his life conserving these so they'd survive him when he died. Yeah, so, yeah. As I say,
porcupines aside.
Yeah. So, anyway.
Very nice. Well, that certainly is a fitting end to your sequence. In a way, it should be the end of the program, but I have one more thing to read, so I'll beg your indulgence. And let's get one last look before I take it off the screen. Well, before I read this last thing, thank you both. This has been lovely. I'm not surprised, but I'm grateful. This one's for my mother and for a kind of resurrection that is open to us through these particular channels. In this case, that of cooking. My mother was a terrific cook. And this poem is called Getting the Eggplant Right. And I should just say that when my mother passed, I inherited her box of index cards, which were her version of her recipes. And they were written for her eyes. So if you were not she, you had to kind of translate the recipes into directions that you could understand, because she left a lot of information out already knowing. So it's a challenge to use her recipes. Getting the eggplant right. Behind me, wooden chest of magic spells on yellowed 3x5-inch index cards. The shorthand fashioned for my mother's eyes. The understood directions left unsaid. Before me, blackness verging into purple and plumped out to the skin, the mystery of eggplant thumped against my fingernail. I guess I have utensils for the job. Within me, the uncertainty that comes of inexperience, and deeper down, the doubt. Magicians work uncanny spells, and all through childhood, I'd been witness to my mother's magic. How could I presume to do myself what only she could do? Her cooking had observed the unities as classically as Aeschylus. It looked, smelled, tasted, satisfied, all of a piece, and nourished me as well. Like little else encountered in this world, in every way, it was exactly what it seemed to be. My buddies lingering in meal times knew. I always counted myself blessed at birth. My mother had been gone for 7 years before I thought to try her recipes. I'd long since given up those tastes for dead, as irretrievable as Christmas from the 50s. I'd provided for myself for decades, cooked for women too, the ones whose generation thought it servitude instead of celebration. But against my mother's standard, what I did in haste could never qualify as genuine. Some people eat to live, she used to say, while others live to eat. It was her art. I stood over the trimmed medallions, salt shaker in hand, and watched the sweat bead up, then patted them with paper towels, dipped in egg and breadcrumbs, lightly fried to dark oak color, layered in a baking dish with thin cut slabs of ropey mozzarella, alternating milky white and brown, then drowned in the tomato red, a sauce smelling of crushed herbs and hard grated cheese. A trip to the preheated oven then, where covered it could bubble up at will. The volume of the kitchen filled with warmth, aroma, and the melody of hope. You'll call it ordinary sorcery to get the eggplant right. What one may do, another may repeat. Ingredients, insensible, can't recognize the hand that shapes and chooses them. The laws of heat, anonymous, work on in no one's name. There is no magic touch. At best, we are the agents of the urge that brings to being according to the way things have to be. But taste it. Tell me that it's not the same as when I came in after playing ball until it got too dark the week before we kids went back to school. Or you can say that anyone could make it taste this way. Think what you want. or taste the truth again. How does the universal work on earth except by way of local blessings? How else does it choose its agents? I don't know. I claim no special virtue for my mother or for me. But after what has sprung from her hands and from mine, I know we share a closeness now we never could before. And while the song of eggplant in the mouth, a chime that's come to many, patiently can wait to be repeated, rung anew in people not yet born, I lift a fork and in a bite, my childhood lives again. After the years of hopelessness, I find what I recover pierces to the root.
You could almost make the dish by following the directions here.
Yeah,
All these appeals to the senses.
yeah. And I like.
I never. Go ahead, please.
I was going to say, and I like the idea of taste, smell, and sight being the three unities of cuisine. I'd never thought of that.
Well,
yeah.
I honestly never thought in my adult life that I was capable of reproducing the flavors, because a flavor is so individual and discrete. You know, if you taste something that's almost like something you remember, you're not fooled into thinking it's what you remember. You've got to get it right. And I never thought that I would get it right. And it was tremendously restorative to me that I was able to regain part of that exchange that I had with my mother when she was alive. It was a wonderful feeling. And I thought there aren't enough poems about regeneration and, there aren't enough poems about phoenixes, but this is a little one by way of the modest eggplant.
Yeah.
You mentioned the universal at work towards the end of the poem. And it seems to me that on the one hand, there's all this very specific detail, sensory detail, and detail about your own family, your own relationship with her. And yet there's also so much that many people could identify with as listeners, like even the wooden chest of magic spells at the beginning. So many of us have inherited recipe boxes with these yellowed 3x5 cards, in which often the crucial directions are left out because
for the same reason. It's true. I've had friends, lifelong friends, some of them, who love their mothers, but were not particularly well fed at home. And they used to hang around our house at dinner time so that they could get invited in. And so I didn't know for a very long time, until I went to boarding school, really, that food wasn't always magical. I was terribly spoiled by that, but on the other hand, I was disabused of it at the age of 14 when I went away to boarding school and started eating what they call dinner. So, it's that whole part of my life seems like a very broad, sunny garden. The cornucopia is full to overflowing. And that was a daily miracle. That my mother was very, very dedicated to. She didn't do anything in an ordinary way. So, when she made an apple pie, on the top crust, she would take some extra dough and make a little round ball and make little leaves. And so there would be an apple with leaves, and then she would get food coloring and paint the ball red and the leaves green.
Wow.
Wow.
So when she gave you the piece of apple pie, it had an apple on it. She was she was a fantastically creative person, but completely in the domestic sphere. So I had a great model of, and she was a tireless worker. So I had a great model of how to be productive and how to be imaginative and how to have pride in what you do. She was a fabulous character, and was very, very well known to people in my hometown. And I still run into people who say how much they miss her, even though I never knew she even knew them. And she's been gone almost 30 years. So it was, I have other poems about her. She was too big a personality to be contained in one eggplant poem, but this was the eggplant poem. So thank you very, very much for your contributions. And I think we made it all work in terms of showing really a rounded and broad range of poems treating the variety of elements in parents and children and their relationships. And all the poems weren't about our own parents or our own children. There were some like Tim's that were biblical, that brought it to another level. This was great. And really bringing in the photographs, I think adds a dimension that I think I'm going to keep open for guests in the future, because my guess is that perhaps you might have read some poems today that you don't usually do at readings. And this was the right venue for these photograph poems. So thank you. I would not have thought of it.
It was a great pleasure to read with you and with Catherine. It's wonderful to see you. Yeah.
Thank you so
I know,
much.
I miss,
It's been great. Really.
I miss everybody.